Good evening and welcome to tonight's presentation of Inspired by Keith. My name is Richard Morales. I'm the manager of community partnerships at the LGBT Community Center, and on behalf of all of us, I want to welcome you all to this space and thank you for your continued support. In 1989, Keith Haring painted what is now the iconic mural Once Upon a Time at the LGBT Center, and since then, similar to Keith Haring's work, we've been engaging in community outreach and activism and arts and culture programming, such as the program that you are a part of tonight. But before I get to that, I want to say also that we tonight will feature a number of videos. One video will feature several artists talking about what it means for them to be inspired by Keith, and then we'll go into a panel discussion about artists and curators that have also been inspired by Keith and talking a little bit about their own personal interactions with the artist and the work itself. But before I get to that, I'd like to introduce you to our director, Glennda Testone, and the acting president of the Keith Haring Foundation, Gil Vazquez. Welcome, Glennda. Welcome, Gil.
Hi, Richard. I'm so excited to be here. Hi, Gil.
Hi, Richard. Hi, Glennda. Thanks for the warm welcome.
Of course. I'm so glad that we are virtually in the bathroom,
Yes.
even not actually in the bathroom. I'm excited to be here tonight and kick off this evening that is inspired by Keith. We at the center have been building and strengthening community for 37 years. And we've been doing that in our building on 13th Street, where this beautiful mural, Once Upon a Time, graces our walls. And we used to welcome 6,000 people a week. When Keith did this piece of artwork, we were really fighting for our lives against HIV and AIDS, against bigotry and hatred. And that fight continues today. A different virus has pushed all of our services online, where we're seeing even higher demand for the kind of community the center provides. LGBTQ plus people are seeking counseling, safety, and support, and at over 40% greater than they were when we were even in the building. Keith was such a vital member of our community, along with a number of artists that are in the Dear Keith show at Sotheby's right now. And I want to thank and honor all of those community members, those who are no longer with us, and those who are here tonight. It's an honor to be on the screen with you, Gil. We are so grateful to be gathered to celebrate the legacy that Keith left in the home that he helped build and celebrate the spirit he embodied. You can't talk.
Glennda, you have something in common with Keith in that you guys are both superheroes to your community. The first time that I walked into the center 30 years ago, comparing it to what the place looks like now, my goodness, what amazing job you've done with the place. And I don't mean that just in a physical sense and how the building looks, because 30 years ago, it was an old school building, pretty run down. And what it looks like now is a transformation that, has to be seen to be believed. And I think, the building is, what the place looks like is only a metaphor for what you have actually, the other kinds of transformations that have taken place there under your leadership. So thank you for what you do. It is an honor for me.
Gil, I want to just thank you personally. I want to thank every working at a nonprofit. I know that the staff of any foundation, and this foundation was built with such love from Keith, and really to carry on his generous legacy that funds so many important organizations, including the center. And we're just so grateful from the bottom of our heart that we can continue to do that because of the generosity of the Keith Haring Foundation. So thank you so much.
It is an honor and a pleasure for the foundation to honor the protection and how you have protected Keith's legacy. How fiercely you protect the mural.
That mural. Nobody's touching.
Nobody's going near it. My goodness, it is really, you know, it is really an honor and a pleasure for us, you know, to honor that that dedication with the Dear Keith sale that is taking place at Sotheby's, and you know, it's so interesting how all of it sort of came about. You know, these works were things by friends of Keith in a lot of cases. And, you know, he was a trader. He used to trade works with his friends. His community was so important to him. And, you know, very recently, our executive director, Julia Gruen, who was, you know, had been working for the foundation for Keith and the foundation for over 36 years, retired. And she left these enormous shoes to fill. All of that coincided with COVID hitting. So it was a lot of transition for us, a lot of you know, a lot of change very suddenly. This idea of the sale of these works was something that, you know, I immediately thought of when I came on board as the acting director. And the whole team here, I mean, the staff, the Haring Foundation staff, the board of directors got behind it right away. And it really was just a no-brainer, you know, that the center would be the recipient of this gift. And, you know, it's the right time. It's the right time for this to happen now. I mean, it makes all the sense in the world.
Well, I think the center is really for the generations to come. And I think Keith believed that. I believe that. And this gift will really provide a lot for generations to come at the center. I know a lot of people have reached out to me. They couldn't join us tonight live, but the good news is this is going to be available in perpetuity, so people can rewatch it. But it's such a pleasure, Gil. I wish we could be there together and I could give you a hug.
Well, hopefully that'll happen soon. Hopefully we will be past this pandemic and we will get to some semblance of normalcy. And I'll look forward to that hug.
Me too.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Gil. Thank you, Glennda, for those kind words and for your support. And I also want to take this moment to thank a few supporters behind the scenes who aren't with us on screen, especially Dorothy Berwin for her continued support in fighting for our rights, as well as for fighting for representation and really pushing the arts forward at the LGBT Community Center. And for that, we're eternally grateful. I want to thank Tom Stoker for his technical savviness and support, as well as Mary Eleanor Stubens, who also assisted in tonight's program. So thank you all from the bottom of my heart. And also thank you to all the panelists and participants that helped put this together. This does take a village, and we couldn't do it without you. So without further ado, we are going to look at some of the videos of artists that are inspired by Keith. So enjoy.
Thank you.
So it's about this long. It takes about 6 minutes to read. And if you can't stand it, you can leave and I won't be offensive. We're all inspired by the future. Can we remember, human people, that everything is sentient? Monarch butterflies people know it, bird people know it, and contemporary ding-dong science can't take that away from us. Hello, P.S., and by the way, money doesn't exist. Will the liberal order survive? Who wants to know? And what are you talking about? And survive for what? We can't even keep a bee alive anymore. Devolution, the U.S. is #1 export. Depression, tyranny, genocide, genetically modified intestines, personal soul encrushment machines, the latest in trash compaction technologies made by Ronco, and redwood-sized toothpicks. According to the experts at Berlin San Diego Platz, there's not a dull moment living through the second industrial revolution, and we feel fine.
Hi, my name is Lyle Ashton Harris. I'm an artist and a professor at NYU. It's a real honor to give a shout out to the Dear Keith auction in support of the center. The center has been a vital asset to our community for decades, and whenever I go there, I always happen upon and make a special, sojourn, if you will, to Keith's seminal important installation titled Once Upon a Time. And during this period of pandemic, it's been hard not to be able to access that, but it does speak and evoke a particular period of time, and I'm excited about New York and its transformation today and the energy, and I feel Keith, very much symbolized the rawness, the energy, and revitalization I think is going to happen out of this particular period we're in right now.
Hi, my name is Jordan Eagles. I had the wonderful pleasure last year of presenting an installation inside the Keith Haring bathroom at the center. The Keith Haring bathroom has always been one of my favorite spaces in New York City. I absolutely love Keith's mural in that space, and you can really sense his energy in there. It meant so much to me to be able to present my work alongside his mural and to be able to contextualize the issues that we're facing currently as a community in relationship to the issues that Keith was addressing in his work. I think it really added a lot, and it's an experience that is very special to me. I want to thank the Center and the Keith Haring Foundation for that opportunity. And as we're living through another pandemic, I hope we're able to turn the corner on it really soon and return to the center in person and be able to experience this wonderful, intimate space, the Keith Haring bathroom, again in person. Thanks again, and everyone be safe and be well.
Hi, I'm Scott Rothkopf, the Chief Curator of the Whitney Museum, and I feel like I'm in a very un-Keith Haring kind of situation. I have the countryside and not New York, and I'm wearing brown. But I do have these birds, which somehow I think he might have liked. And what I want to say is this. I still remember the very first time I saw a Keith Haring. And I can't say that about Picasso. I can't say that about Edward Hopper. I can't say that about Van Gogh. But I can say that in 1985, when I was 3 years old, okay, just kidding, when I was 9, in Dallas, Texas, my mom had a catalog, and in it there were Keith Haring Swatch watches. And I was so obsessed with these Swatch watches. I kept looking at the picture, like if I looked at it long enough, I would get my own Keith Haring Swatch watch, which I didn't get because I think they were like $40, and the original Swatch watch was maybe $30, and the extra $10 was just like out of my allowance range. But my whole life, I've remembered those Keith Haring Swatch watches. And even though now I'm the curator of a museum that has these big Keith Haring works in it that we love to show and that our audiences love, I feel like maybe that very first encounter was like quintessential Haring, that this kid in Dallas who was on his way to being gay, if not already, got to connect with this artist's mind and like just sort of touched a nerve. And that's always stuck with me, and I'm really happy to help in any way I can to support the center and to celebrate Keith Haring's work.
Hola, mi nombre es Catalina Schlivener, soy artista visual y educadora chilena, radicada en Brooklyn hace algunos años, y en esta ocasión estoy muy contenta de participar de este evento subasta celebrando la obra de Keith Haring y en beneficio de The Center. Quería hablar un poco de la influencia de la obra de Keith Haring en mi propio trabajo y lo importante que es una pieza en particular, que es la que se encuentra en The Center, en el baño en el segundo piso, que se llama Once Upon a Time. Esta pieza en particular fue súper importante para mí. Yo trabajo con materiales encontrados y con objetos e imágenes de la cultura popular relacionadas con la infancia. Y el año 2016 realicé mi primera muestra individual acá en la ciudad de Nueva York, justamente en The Bureau of General Service Queer Division, que está en el mismo piso en donde se encuentra esa obra en The Center, y pasé mucho tiempo en ese baño, cada vez que tenía un break para descansar, me iba al baño a leer o simplemente a estar con esa obra de Keith. Y tuve la suerte de estar en ese cuarto por mucho tiempo observándola y fue súper importante para mí porque eran los primeros años que yo venía a vivir acá y ese espacio de alguna manera me dio no solo un espacio de reflexión en donde me sentía súper segura y bienvenida, sino que además fue un espacio también para conmemorar y para recordar a algunos amigos que no están acá y que perdí por el SIDA. Así que siempre recuerdo ese espacio con mucho, mucho cariño y cada vez que voy a The Center lo visito. Así que estoy muy contenta de estar en esta oportunidad celebrando a Keith Haring en esta ocasión. Gracias por la invitación y espero que todo salga muy bien.
Hi there, yes, my name is Darren P, and I'm the curator from Tate Liverpool, and I was the curator of the first major Keith Haring exhibition, which came to the UK in the summer of 2019. The show was a huge success for Tate in terms of sort of large audiences, but also critically. And I think in some ways we're still in the afterglow of the exhibition, which is now touring museums in Europe. In terms of being inspired by Keith, I think Tate was inspired by Keith, the way in which he was working in a very public way. He was working very collaboratively. He was drawing on fine art ideas. You know, the work had a sort of a sophistication and a hybrid quality, which made it it looked simple. It looked and it obviously had this like immediacy, but it was drawing on many different sources: fine art, pop art, sort of semiotics, all these different performance art. We're all sort of converging. I think critically for us, it's also the way in which Keith Haring was responding to themes in the 1980s. Such as the AIDS crisis and apartheid and racism, homophobia, stockpiling of nuclear warheads, all these issues which were obviously very urgent in the 1980s, but also seem to be very urgent in 2020. So that sort of taking an artist who was also an activist, who had a strong sense of social justice, and then presenting it in a Tate show, I think was really key, and I think it really chimed with what Tate is trying to achieve. I think so. I think in terms of being inspired by Keith, I think Tate really had a palpable presence across Tate in the summer of 2019. I know the LGBTQ Centre is a really important site for Keith Haring, and I wish you well with the fundraising. Thank you.
When I think of inspired by Keith, the great high standard he sets for me is that he was able to make a work that was socially committed to what he thought was important. And he was able to make work that was just so communicative. It was just so vivid. It was so much his own. And I don't think there are many artists who really connect all the dots like that.
I'd say that his work is so personal, and it takes a lot to be an artist and be so transparent with all of your demons, so to speak. So I think that the way that he's so transparent and the work is so clear, it's joyous, but it's also political, and it's a style that you can't, when you see it, you just know that's Keith Haring or someone that is inspired by him.
Keith Haring experienced joy. Stand up for what you truly believe in. And don't let the bastards get you down. Live every moment.
We're very thankful to have with us Elizabeth Sussman, who is the curator of photography at the Whitney Museum. Next, we have Lola Flash. Lola uses photography to challenge stereotypes and offer new ways of seeing that transcend and interrogate gender, sexual, and racial norms, and currently works in portraiture with a 4x5 camera, engaging those who are often deemed invisible. So welcome, Lola. And then next we have Peter McGough, who is an artist and part of the duo McDermott and McGill, who have collaborated on unique, all-encompassing art practices since the 1980s, intertwining their life and art that explores issues of gay identity, societal repression, and performative time travel. So thank you all for joining us.
First of all, I should say that prior to coming to New York, I worked at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston. And when I was there, I had the chance to actually meet Keith. He was brought in to do a mural, and everybody, has their own sense of him. But my memories are so vivid of his coming in and producing this incredible thing on the wall just right away, working all day without stopping. The electricity of his presence and what he produced I'm just so thankful that in the midst of working on this exhibition that I actually had a personal memory of the man. So that was great.
Middle to late 80s, of course, I started seeing his murals here and there. And then I joined ACT UP, almost it seems like as soon as I moved to New York, I joined ACT UP. So I can remember a time, this was when, we actually had our meetings. For those who don't know, we had our meetings at the center. The center looked very different than it does now. But we had it in the main big room. And it got to the point where there weren't enough chairs for everyone to sit. So you would either lean against one of the columns or sit on the floor. And then, as Richard, you mentioned, sometimes it would sort of flow out into the hallway. But I remember clearly Keith coming, and I could see him going towards the front, with a chair, because most of we called them PWAs, people with AIDS is what we called them. A lot of the people who were HIV positive would sit in the front on chairs. And I can remember Keith coming with a chair, and it's a little bit foggy, but I feel like there was someone that was sicker than him that needed a chair, and he gave that chair to them. And I knew who he was. At that point, he was becoming pretty famous by then. But I just thought, what a humble move that was, and just always kind of, out of all the things that I've forgotten, it's one of the things I remember.
Yeah, I met Keith in 1980 because McDermott wanted to take over this loft that Kenny Sharp was sharing with this cute guy that had a crush on me. And it ended up in a huge fight with the madman screaming at Kenny and Keith and this young fellow. And so we became enemies. And then in 1980, I went up to Hudson, New York and lived there for a year. And when I came back, Keith was already a rising star with Tony Shafrazi from the Mud Club, shows at the Mud Club, shows at Club 57, so I'd see him, but I wasn't in that circle of the Club 57. And, his work to me was about joy at the beginning, dancing figures, the crawling babe, the radiant child, all of that. And I remember at the time he was mocked by the older art establishment. They didn't like his work, and they thought this cartoon work was, it wasn't Liechtenstein, but it was interesting to see it. And then his work, when he became ill, and also with him and his African-American boyfriend, he started making work about the apartheid, about the destruction of Black people. And then he went on to AIDS. And, his work was very homoerotic, as mine was. And, he died at 31. I'm 62. He'd be 62 now. And Keith, he died a failure of the art market.
When you were thinking about putting this Haring show together, what were some of the statements or some of the narratives that you wanted to point out from his work and how that came about?
Well, I think the interesting thing was how he moved. He was at SVA, as I remember, as it was where he went to art school. And just like Peter said, he came from a small town in Pennsylvania, and from a his family, who are still very actively involved with the foundation after all these years and with Keith's career, but nonetheless, he was very unusual in the context of his family. And I wasn't there for whether it was reconciliation or whatever, but anyway, so he came to SVA, and back in those days, people kind of were still in their studios, I think, working inside. And one of the striking things about Keith right from the beginning was how he opened the studio. He opened the fourth wall. He worked in a garage where he left the doors open. And so that he somehow just saw the light that he wanted to be a public artist. And that was something that was not necessarily known. I mean, it was known in New York City, in that there were all these graffiti people that were, so-called vandalizing the subway system. And so Keith knew that there was this sort of underground, and he wanted his SVA background and that underground to sort of come together. And so I think that was the startling narrative of the beginning. That's one of the stories that was interesting. Then the other story that was interesting was how he kind of dissolved the barrier between the gallery show, let's say, that somebody like Tony Shifrazzi, who was a very early and ardent supporter of the artist, somehow could see that there was little difference between the gallery show and the club. And he kind of could exploit the entertainment value of both of them, and they commingled. And I think that was an unusual part of his career, and maybe even a first time, because I think maybe those neo-expressionists that you were talking about, Peter, I mean, they were still guys for the most part who wanted those big paintings to go into big galleries. That was kind of it. I think Keith was very much a part of the club scene. I mean, eventually it was disco. Mud Club was not the place where he hung. It was Studio 57 and this group of people, but it was the club and dancing and the street that he allowed to all come together.
The murals he made.
And the murals. Then the idea that he would go out and he would that he would be commissioned, or he would spontaneously do murals, and people would watch him work, and he would involve other people in his work. These are breathtaking leaps, I think, for an artist to make. And he wasn't alone; other people were doing them. But this was like, when I think back on it, just truly amazing reinvention of the idea of what an artist could be. And then as he came to terms with his own illness and the politics surrounding that illness, the activism really, kicked in, and he wasn't going to hide it, and it became the subject of some of his great and very tragic late work, in which the style. We haven't talked at all about the signature style. I mean, I think that's something that we should talk about too, because he had a kind of
talk about it.
He had a mark, and he had these characters that became his. I mean, it's kind of comic book derived, but it's a brilliant decision to have made that. This was not pop art. This was kind of, I mean, Keith Haring has now been used for 1 million logos. It was like the idea of the logo, it grows out of his work, really. Yeah. And so people would see his work and they would say, oh, I know, I may not know his name, but I know who he is. I know who he is because I know those signs, I know those symbols. And so I think all those things, as the more you kind of got into Keith Haring, the more you realized it. And he's a very learned man too. I mean, he knew about pictographs and hieroglyphics and things like that. And he could see the relationship between all those things. So I like that Peter mentioned joy, because I think that's the other he found a graphic language to convey joy, like a million exclamation marks or something like that.
Yeah.
And so and the very simple use of color. And so you kind of get it. Now, I suppose at the time in the 80s, there was a lot of sort of, very deep thinking going on in the art world. This might have seemed too simple. This might have, yeah, it might have been the reason he was a quote unquote failure or under-recognized or something like that.
Keith and Kenny Scharf and Jean-Michel and then ourselves were the artists that moved to Soho, where the East Village collapsed. Even our gallery at the time, Massimo Adiello, moved above Speroni Westwater, my future gallery, to get out of the dying scene of the East Village. David Wojnarowicz stayed. He was the real great artist of that village scene. And it was a different group. There were different fractions. There was the Club 57 fraction of Kwong Chi as the documenter, Ian Magnuson as the performer, Kenny and Keith as the artists. So that was their club. And then there were the other Mud Club groups of Glenn O'Brien, Deborah Harry, John Laurie, and all those people. They considered them cool, as Club 57 was groovy. And so in all of this was art. And when everyone saw the fame of Soho artists, especially someone like Julian Schnabel, they couldn't get in, so they started their own game. And as Rene Ricard wrote in that article about the Fun Gallery, not the Radiant Child, there was another one, and Jimmy DeSana did the portrait of Patty Astor, the dealer. He was saying we had to start our own war, meaning our own scene, and that Soho was so locked down that they started it in East Village. And then those East Village artists, someone like David Wojnarowicz died, and then now is getting this recognition. And also, he just had the show at the Bronx Museum a couple of years ago. The Asian San Francisco artist, he had his show in the Bronx Museum, and then now they're desired. And he has a mural in the center down the stairs of the brick penis. Oh, I can't remember his name. That's
Martin Wong. Martin Wong.
And he has success after that show where it was silence. A few crickets, but it was silence. And now he's getting the recognition that I feel he so well deserves.
I want to speak to the other artists now in the room and ask you about that, Lola, in terms of what Peter just said.
Yeah, that was great. I can't wait to read your book.
Thank
Peter.
you.
So yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the things I was talking about so far as the things that influenced Keith's life, and one of the things I admire about him so much is that he was very transparent about his sexuality. And so thinking about the artists today, there are a lot of artists actually today that are queer, and they're, as far as I can see, they're in the closet. Their work does not look like queer art. And I sometimes grapple with this because I understand, like, as a Black artist, that their society is expecting me to tell the narrative of the African American, and I'm like, where's the paper, really? Because if I'm not going to tell my story, then it's been told through history, and so many things have been left out. So why shouldn't I take on that role to be the griot, to be that storyteller? And so when I look at other artists, and I generally, when I talk about these people, I don't like to name them because I do like their work, but I also think, like, wow, you've gotten to this point in your career. And like, think about Janelle Monáe. Now, when Janelle Monáe, I know she's a music artist, but she's still an artist, right? So when Janelle came out, when she started doing her singing, all the family was like, oh, she's in the family, you know, she's one of us. Like we all knew that she was queer, but she sort of, you know, did this work for about 2 years, and then finally she came out, you know. And so I understand, because homophobia is just as real as racism and sexism in you know, in this 21st century. So I understand why she decided to do that. And but it's one of the things that I sort of grapple with, because I think that, I guess my point is that if you're an artist that is queer, particularly if you're Black or brown, then why aren't you coming out? You know, I'm not saying that you have to do work that is specifically, you know, two women kissing, but for me, I think that the content also matters. And I think that we need, us queer folks, especially us Black queer folks, we need to see ourselves. And what better person to show it than those people that are already made it and have, you know, have like such a bigger scope. So that's one thing that I really liked about his work. But then also, like Peter, as you were saying, you know, these, you know, I mean, like, there were a lot of artists, and all those artists that you mentioned were men and were white, except for the young man that you spoke about, with the
Martin Wong.
Martin Wong, yeah. And so, you know, as a Black woman, I've been doing work, you know, really since I had a camera since I was like 6, you know, so I've been taking pictures. They weren't politically charged when I was a little kid, but I've been sort of looking through a viewfinder for my whole life. And it's now that I'm, you know, 61 and a half, that I'm finally getting some recognition. You know, the Guardian newspaper in London, they've been, you know, reaching out to me when there's something happens, and I sort of, you know, especially around Black Lives Matters. And so it's interesting sort of to be in those spaces like Peter's talking about, to be around those people. Like David used to come to our Art Positive meetings. That was like an affinity group that was part of ACT UP, and sort of rubbing shoulders with these folks, and waiting sort of another 40 years for people to finally kind of, you know, hear my name. So there's that. That is, it's frustrating, but it's also, you know, James Baldwin says the thing that drives him to wake up is that he's Black and queer, you know, so it's the same for me. It's like, gosh, I have so much material. I have so many stories to tell, you know what I mean? It's like now that I've got like maybe 40 years left, I'm like, okay, let me work a little faster, because I've got a lot of stories to tell. And, you know, it's the way that I think it's part of, I know it's part of our DNA, you know, this, when you come from slaves, the only way out is to think positive and to be creative, to creatively think about these problems and create something happy and joyous, or something revolutionary out of these things.
These are topics that still, that they're, even though they might not look like it in terms of the image, but when you get down to the nitty-gritty of it, they're bringing up these really deep-seated things, these deep-rooted like topics that are really important conversations. And so I'm just curious to see like what you think of in terms of the role of arts within activism today, and how that relates in a way to Haring's activism through what you mentioned before with ACT UP, with the his thoughts on apartheid. So
yeah, well, I mean, that could be a book, right? That question. That question. I mean, I would think about like what Peter was saying, you know, the reason why my work is, I photograph people who are deemed invisible, is because I too did not see myself growing up. So it's important for me to create those images. And I guess, you know, I'm thinking about Keith, and, you know, thinking about the way that I present the people that I photograph. It's in a very sort of proud, you know, I get them specifically to strike a proud pose. I often will say to them, think about pride and power. so that they're really sort of like showing or emoting those emotions. And I think with Keith, I mean, it's interesting. I was thinking about all the signs that people are making for the demonstrations. You know, they're a lot of them are very simplistic. When we were in ACT UP, everything was like done, you know, on a computer, and you know, it was all sort of like looked professional. But I'm really liking a lot of the signs, the homemade signs that people are making for these demonstrations. And yeah, I mean, I both with Keith and with Vazquez, I do think to myself, I wonder what they would be, you know, doing now. I wonder what their art would look like now. What new symbols would they create? Because not only do they have their own, you know, they have their own, well, like Elizabeth saying, like, you know, this idea of hieroglyphics, you know, they have their own symbols that they actually created, and then they use, you know, like hearts and sort of symbols that we all are aware of, you know. So I'm wondering what kind of new symbols they might have created. I think that when I think about Keith, I think about the work that he donated to ACT UP for the different parties that we had. And I think that as for me as an artist, you know, I donated some of my work during the pandemic, and I've been caught up in the whole, I guess I'll just call it situation at the Whitney, where, you know, the Whitney bought many of our artworks, probably about 60 people's artwork for probably $2,000 altogether. And, you know, thinking about what is that saying to us as artists?
Keith's work was not brought into the museum right away. In fact, as Peter said, you know, the museums had a distance to it, you know, but his work was very activist all during the decade he was working on it, and directly addressing causes that he was at the center of. But no museum said, "Oh, we have to have that. You know, we have to get that into the collection. We have to get it up on the walls because it represents what's going on and that we all feel very deeply about." That was then. That was the 80s. We're now living through the 2020s. And so what's the difference? I mean,
well, you have, I just can interject, pardon my intrusion, but you know, they were in their 20s. He was in his 20s. He died at 31.
Yeah.
He made his work in the 20s, as Vazquez did, who died at 28. That's the insanity of what they did in their 20s.
Right. But their work found its way into the galleries, right? And so
early on, 21
right.
years, 22.
Right. And into collections, I mean, but not into what the museums thought they should be collecting.
Yeah.
Not that it matters, but it's just a fact, just a difference.
Yeah, it does matter historically, because then you get a viewpoint of what it was going on, you know. So you're correct.
I mean, for me, my thoughts are just around, my thoughts are around the fact that there have been many white gay men who have been able to jump the fence, and for girls that look like me, not so much. So I see what you mean, because of the nature of it, of the work, was not like being looked at as something that galleries wanted to show. But yeah, I don't know.
And I think what you said, and just knowing you from other conversations too, Lola, is that, you know, I see that as what you just said about like not seeing girls like you in these kinds of spaces, where, you know, it makes sense when you talk about your role as an educator, you know, in your like what you teach for students, but then also just I'm thinking specifically about your role as a mentor for the Queer Art Mentorship Program and who you were working with at that time. And it happened to be a young girl that looked just like you. And so I see that, you know, like in your work, not just what you produce, but what is being done when you're not looking in the viewfinder, so to speak. His work is reaching a younger audience these days, and it was really great that you shared with me those slides of how your students were interacting with these pieces. And I'm wondering if we can take a look at some of them.
Can I just add one thing? I
Yeah.
forgot that, one of the things about the work also is that teaching in New York, there still are a few murals around that sometimes my students will say, oh, Ms. Flash, I saw that mural of, sometimes they'll remember Keith, sometimes they'll remember Harry, sometimes they'll just say the artist, but it's because of the way that the art world is, I think that my students don't always feel comfortable or are not always welcome, so to speak. And so I think that accessibility is something that's really important to me about his work, and particularly thinking about the students that I teach, which are mostly Black and Latinx students.